Hello, my name is Sean Osborne, and welcome to the Black Patriots of Lexington. Lexington, Massachusetts, the birthplace of liberty, the site of the first armed conflict of the American Revolution. Lexington, the home of black residents since it was known as Cambridge Farms. Some of those black residents owned property and paid taxes. Others were enslaved or indentured. Many of them played vital roles in the founding of the United States of America. Scholars estimate that at least 50 black men responded to the Lexington alarm and engaged the British regulars on April 19, 1775. 3 of those men were from Lexington, Prince Esterbrook and cousins Eli and Silas Burdew. 2 other men are known to have fought in Lexington. Caesar Ferret and his son John Ferret both served with the Natick militia. And over 2,000 black patriots from Massachusetts served between 1775 and 1783. Today, we will explore the life and times of Pomp Blackman, a black patriot who was living in Lexington on April 19, 1775, and was a soldier during the American Revolution. We know a lot about this formerly enslaved man because of the community Pomp Blackman built and the records about him that have been preserved. Our guide on this exploration of the incredible life of Pomp Blackman is Dr. Robert Bellinger. Dr. Bellinger, welcome.
Thank you, Sean. How are you today?
Great, thank you. So, I love this story of Pomp Blackman that you have been researching and brought to us. How did you come across him in your studies?
Well, I first encountered him just in looking at black soldiers who had been in the Revolution. And there was a listing of black soldiers who had mustered in Lexington, and he was among those. And for some reason, his name caught my eye, and I decided to look further at him. And then someone said to me, well, he wasn't a resident of Lexington. And I said, oh, let me look at this. So I began to look at when did he enlist and how did he come to enlist in Lexington if he was not from Lexington. And then that led me to looking at where he ended up after his service.
Great, great. And so one of the pieces of the puzzle was, when did he come to Lexington and why? So we have that piece from 1773 from John Simons. So John Simons, like so many folks in Lexington, was required to say to his neighbors, this person living with me is not a stranger that should be warned out. This is my guest, this is my renter, this is my new employee, whatever. And so he found these town records from 73, where John Simons says to the selectmen, I have taken into my house to reside with me one Pomp Blackman, a Negro. He came to me the 29th day of March, 1773. His last place of residence was Woburn, with his late master, Nathan Wyman. So who was Nathan Wyman to John Simons? Was there a relationship that ended up bringing Pomp to Lexington?
Yes, it's interesting. I did find that we're not sure when or where he was born, but we do know that he was enslaved by Nathan Wyman in Woburn. Nathan Wyman dies in 1773, and after that, Pomp gets his freedom. We're not sure in his will, his son is the executor. There's no mention of Pomp in anything. So I don't know if there was a previous promise that he would have his freedom then or not, but he takes his freedom and moves to Lexington and moves into John Simons' home. Now, through a convoluted path of marriages and relationships, John Simons is connected to Nathan Wyman through this convoluted path. I can't break it all down now.
Okay.
It took me a long time
right.
to follow it, but through his wife, they're related to the Simons.
And so, if I remember correctly, the Simons household is somewhere in near the intersection of Burlington Street and Simons Road. And so if you continue down Simons Road until it runs into what's now Bedford Street, you have Simon's Tavern, which is a later structure, not during this period we're talking about today. And across the street from that structure is where the Purdue household would have been. And so you have this other portion of town. And interestingly, you have down the road from Pomp Blackman, you have Adam Tidd, who's enslaved. But Pomp Blackman's not. He's free now. He's been manumitted through some way, and he's now staying with John Simons. Is he a boarder? Is he paying?
As far as I know, he is boarding, and I'm not sure if he is paying. I would assume he is, because in as early as 1773, he's assessed taxes by the town.
Okay.
A poll tax but it's first listed under the name Pomp Wyman.
Okay.
Right. And Wyman is spelled differently, W-I-M-A-N as opposed to W-Y-M-A-N. But he continues to be assessed taxes in 76. We find him on rolls after the war in 80, 81, 82. So he's paying taxes, so he's probably paying something for his residence.
And so it's interesting you say that about the name, because that's also what I understand was the case with Prince Chester, that initially he was known in town as Prince Stone after his enslaver, and then he asserts his last name as Pomp Blackman does. Did he have a skill set that he came Lexington with from Woburn? What do you believe? I'm
not sure. He lists himself in his will as a laborer. In the document where he gives his power of attorney to a friend as a laborer, several times he says a laborer, but he was probably very successful with the labor that he did,
right? Because
he earned, money. And as you know, he was paid by the town at different times, and even after his death, there were people who owed him money.
And so that is beautiful that he's able to assert his independence to the point where he's assessed and paying his taxes. He is not as Dr. Green suggests, he is not living life as a second-class citizen, as a free man, that he is fully engaged in the community as an equal. Is that your impression through your records?
Yeah, he seems to have have taken a place in the town. He had relationships with many town members, it seems, and was seemingly respected by the town. I haven't found anything to the contrary of that.
We've established that he's living in Lexington in 1773, but he doesn't appear to engage in the battle in April 1775, but I believe soon thereafter he enlists as a soldier. Is that correct?
Yes. There are some, in a couple of things that implies that he may have arrived after the battle on Lexington Green and been one of those who fought against the British as they retreated to Boston. But we do know that in May of 1776, he was listed in Captain John Wood's company, and that he had sworn the oath required by Congress to be taken by the mass army, which was significant because it was only shortly before that, I think a couple of months before, when the oath was created. And so he took the oath, swearing allegiance to the army and to follow the rules of the army and so forth.
So he does that, and then again with your research, I believe he found that he wanted to make sure that his affairs were taken care of while he was away in the military. So did you find a power of attorney as well?
Well, yes, and interestingly enough, he takes out a power of attorney, gives Amos Fortune of Woburn his power of attorney. And Amos Fortune, and he probably had developed some relationship in Woburn. Amos Fortune had been there as enslaved by a person who was a tanner, and he learned that trade. And when he was able to, he purchased his freedom. Then he purchased the freedom of a woman who he married. And this probably had an impact on Pomp, realizing, oh, this is the way things can go. You know, you can obtain your freedom and so forth. So he gives Amos Fortune his power of attorney. And it's interesting because Amos Fortune has the power to collect for him, collect any monies owed, et cetera, and settle all business.
So, two enslaved black men meet in Woburn. Amos Freeman gets his freedom before Pomp Blackman. He is staying in the community. He's engaged in the community. He is making money in the community, making enough money in the community not only to house himself and pay all of his bills, but also to have excess so that he can purchase the freedom of someone whom he wants to marry. And so this is the example that Pomp Blackman has before his enslaver dies, and he then has his freedom. So he has this model to follow. And so then we now have these two formerly enslaved black men writing out debt receipts and collecting on those debt receipts.
Yeah,
it's beautiful.
It's very interesting because Amos Fortune gets his freedom about 4 years before Pomp. In 1777, while Pomp is enlisted in the military, he gave, as he said, his trusty friend Amos Fortune of Woburn the power of attorney. And I love what it says. He gives him the right to ask, demand, recover, or receive of and from all persons indebted to him. And he ratified, allowed, and confirmed anything his attorney shall lawfully do or cause to be done in and about the execution of the premises. So gave him the right to collect his money in any way that he could do so. And this is very clear. It also reflects that Pompey was doing well enough financially to loan money to people.
Right.
You know, and to demand it back, that he had enough status to demand that he be repaid.
And I've seen the records in Lexington that Moses Boudreaux, who was born free, he was doing something similar, but he was born free. Here we have Pomp Blackman with only a few years of freedom already exercising all of the legal means available to him by the society to make sure that he gets back what he's due.
Yeah, and that says to me that these men were really attentive to the way the laws worked, the way the economy worked, the rights that they had as free people, and they were willing to exercise that. And it's kind of exciting when you think about it, you know, that here they are before America is America, before it's the United States, exercising these rights and saying, yes, we are full and equal members of this society.
And it's such a successful partnership in terms of Amos Fortune's ability to collect for Pomp Blackman that we see that later on in 77, that Pomp Blackman enlists for another 3 years, right? He signs on for a 3-year service. And what's interesting for me is that below him on these papers is Isaac Barbados. And Isaac Barbados was the eldest child of Kate and Quock Barbados, who were enslaved in Lexington. They end up becoming free before their youngest child, Abel, is born there, and then Quock dies, and Kate raises her children, apparently alone. But we see Isaac here with Pomp, two formerly enslaved black men fighting side by side, and unfortunately, Isaac dies in '77 in December, but Pomp continues. But we have these people who have found a way to make Massachusetts Bay Colony work for them, and so I appreciate seeing that example. Do we know more about what happens with Amos and Pomp after '77?
Well, I know that Amos Fortune, Pomp continues to serve in the military until 1780.
Right.
It's interesting how his paths cross with other Lexington men. For a while in '76, he served in the same company as Prince Estabrook. And there are others he served with. It's interesting to wonder if they talked about Lexington or, what it would be like to get back to Lexington or whatever. And I know Lexington meant something because Pomp always made sure it was listed that he was from Lexington on all the military documents. Even in his will, he states of Lexington. So he really, Lexington, being a resident of Lexington was important to him. It was significant.
And I had heard that recently that there's a letter from a non-black soldier from Lexington talking about what's going on, Ticonderoga or somewhere else there where they're stationed, and he mentions Pomp Blackman.
Yes. So he was known by others who were serving from Lexington. So he continues to serve till 1780. Amos Fortune, and I don't have the exact timeline, but he ends up leaving Woburn. He has a very interesting story because the woman he purchased who he married, she died shortly after. He ended up purchasing the freedom of another woman who he married, who didn't live a long time either. And so he did it a third time. And with his third wife, they ended up moving to New Hampshire and settling there.
Okay. So if someone were to follow online and look up information about Pomp Blackman, I've noticed that there seems to be a separate Pomp Blackman who's also known as Pomp Freeman or Pomp Fortune. Could you help us understand how those, if those are two people and what's going on there?
Yeah, it is interesting because in many of the biographies of him, it mentions that he moved to New Hampshire.
Pomp Blackman, right?
Yeah, that Pomp Blackman moved to New Hampshire with his good friend Amos Fortune, and that he worked there in the tanning business with him until his death in 1790. What has happened is that there are two different Pompes that have been conflated. There's Pomp Blackman, and then there's Pomp Freeman. And they're explained as being the same by saying he changed his name from Blackman to Freeman. But his choice of the name Blackman was something he consciously did after first being called Pomp Blackman. And so he wouldn't just change it again after, it seems, because he was already a free man. And free man usually was a designation someone chose the name to designate their freedom. The way they get conflated is because of Amos Fortune.
Okay.
Since Pomp Blackman was friends with Amos Fortune when they were in Woburn, when folks saw another Pompey working as an apprentice for him in New Hampshire, they assumed it was the same person because he was working now for Amos Fortune. But when I first saw this, I said, well, wait a minute. Here's somebody who hired Amos to be his power of attorney, who is collecting for him. In his later years, he would not become an apprentice, it would seem to me, to his friend. Right.
Okay.
So I began to look further into it, and then discovered that it was impossible to be the same person, because Pomp Blackman had died in 1783.
Pomp Blackman of Lexington.
Of Lexington
had
died in 1783.
Right. And so I appreciate that clarification. So before he dies in 83, we find the records of him in 1782 being here, where he is being paid. This is in the town, the selectmen in 1782. They order his payment. And given his enlistments, it could be for his enlistment. And again, as a free man, he's being paid directly, not as a servant of someone else. Mm-hmm. And I noticed that it's Pomp B. Blackman. So I wonder if there were other Pomp Blackmans that he's trying to separate himself from when he's doing that, or what do you know about that B?
I'm not sure, and I'm not sure if that's just
typo
or what, because he's not listed as Pomp B. Blackman anywhere else.
Okay.
But what's interesting here is that the note was for a substantial amount. That's 15 pounds. That's a good amount of money at the time,
Right.
So
he's doing all right.
So he had some money.
Do you know why he ends up joining the church so late? What's going on with him at that point?
Well, I'm not sure.
When I say late, I mean 82.
Yeah, he joins the church in November of 82. But what's interesting is that he makes a pledge or announcement that he wants to get married in 1781 to a woman, Susanna Bay, from Hollister.
Is that he publishes a band? Is that what they call that?
Yeah, he puts a band. And that's interesting in itself, because Hollister is about 25 miles away. So what it says to me is about the network that black folks had. It was a very extensive network of communication and knowing one another. And so he published his band, but then it was denied by Duty Bay, her father. He did not want her marrying Pomp Blackman. I'm not sure why, but he doesn't get married. In November of 1782, he was baptized, and church records say in private, as he was sick, very sick. Now, what I think happened, he was living in the Simmons house, which was, I think, very interesting for him, because John Simmons also had several black boys who were working for him. They were called servants, but that was a nice way of saying enslaved. He had several of them working for him.
And they would have been under 16, so they wouldn't have been on the tax rolls. So how did you find them before you got too far in that?
I found that one of them died that December, 1782. And it was probably an illness that had gone around in the house, and the reason why Pompey was very sick. And Pompey dies in January of 1783.
So as was common during that time period, disease spread quickly within the household, and sometimes when there's one death, there's a second, and you see those in the records as well.
Yeah. And so, yeah, it probably went around and went through the house, and he probably caught it, and it, maybe being older, it affected him more than others in the house.
So before he dies, he has a will.
Mm-hmm.
So what do we know about his will?
Well, what's interesting is that he clearly considered himself a Christian person by that time, and which is interesting. It may be the late baptism, but in it he says, I humbly recommend my precious and immortal soul to God, my Maker, through the merits and mediation of Jesus Christ, and my body to the dust in hopes of a joyful resurrection.
Yeah, he's a believer.
You know, that's very...
That's a testament.
Yeah, very strong. And one of the things about his will is that you learn quite a bit about him in that. You learn that he was doing quite well financially. In the fact that, and you also learn that he was connected to the larger community. The reason I say that he was doing quite well is that he talks about what he leaves and what's in his inventory is something that you kind of go, huh, that's interesting. Because he says he gives to his friend, he calls him his beloved friend, Levi Parker. He leaves to him his silver shoe buckles, silver knee buckles, and silver stock buckles, and a brooch.
Lots of silver.
Yeah, so, and for me, I have this image of him, you know, cutting a figure across the green with all this silver on, you know, on a special day or something, and you know, right, the sun glinting off of it and, you know, making a statement in itself. He also has some very nice clothes. As I said, he refers to Levi Parker as his beloved friend. John Bridge is the executor of his estate, and he refers to him as his trusty friend. So he clearly was connected to other members of the Lexington community.
This is John Bridge, who is not only a member of the Bridges who were part of Cambridge Farms, but this is John Bridge who responds to the alarm on April 19, 1775, whose cousin Joseph Bridge is down the street, and that's where Eli Burdew is when he's an indentured child. Mm-hmm. But John Bridge is a leader in town. He holds many positions throughout his life. He knows people.
Yeah.
Who have means and are well respected within the community, and usually those people like to be known by their peers. So again, go back to your other comment, mm-hmm, Pomp Blackman is also well respected within the community.
Yeah, and so he had these connections with people. He wasn't just some guy.
Right.
Right. And having a man of means be the executor of the will says a great deal about how he was considered in the town, I think.
And so we don't know where many people are buried during this time period. Were you able to find, what happens to Pomp Blackman's body after he dies?
No, I have no indication of where he is buried. But there was one other thing that did come up in researching this that really made me kind of go, ooh, a little bit of scandal.
What's that?
And that's that John Bridge, who was his executor,
right,
took out a warrant against John Simmons and his wife, who Pompey was living with.
The landlord and his wife, yes.
Yes, and he said he believes they had concealed several things that should have been in the estate inventory. And the way it reads is very interesting. It says that this to inform you that as I was appointed executor to the last will and testament of Pompey Blackman, late of Lexington, and a commission being granted by your honor for apprising said estate, accordingly on the 21st of March, the commissioners, being notified, did meet at the house of Mr. John Simmons, and apprised all the estate belonging to the said Pompey that was shown by the said Simmons, according to the inventory now exhibited. And whereas it doth appear to me, the executor of said will, that there is a number of things embezzled or concealed by the said Simmons. A note signed John Simmons for £13 6 shillings and 8 pence, bearing date May 1774 or 5, with 2 years interest.
Wow.
And $1 interest on the back. Also, 3 silver spoons, a green silk purse, a pair of light blue gloves with some cash, the sum not known.
So just to clarify, John Bridge is saying there was a note, a promissory note, saying that John Simmons, the landlord, owed Pomp Blackman, the renter, 13 pounds, a significant amount of money, and had not been able to pay that back over 2 years. And suddenly, that note that would have been due
disappears.
Huh. Interesting is a good term. So what ends up happening? At the end of after John Bridge makes this recommendation that further investigation occur, what happens?
Well, what's interesting is that in Pompey's inventory, he has quite a bit of cash. He has 27 pounds of silver money.
Wow.
Right, in his estate.
Not paper, silver.
Silver, as well as notes from several town residents that owe him money. So he was doing quite well. What ends up happening is there's an addendum to the charges that reads, John Simmons and his wife, having purged themselves by oath, are acquitted. And Oliver Prescott was the probate judge on that. So they swore by oath that they had not taken anything, and that was good enough to acquit them.
As a former high school teacher and college professor, what would you want students of history to know about Pomp Blackman?
Well, first, that he was a member of the Lexington community by choice. Very often we, don't hear about the range of black men who were not only living in Lexington, but who also heeded the call for military service from Lexington, which led to the independence of America. So that's one thing that I want people to know about him. 2, that he was successful, that he found a way to live a good life, and that he was living free and independent with money in his pocket, and and that he was a member of the town, that others knew him and saw him in a respectful way.
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate your coming in and sharing the story of Pomp Blackman. I hope that you have been inspired by the life of Pomp Blackman, a formerly enslaved black man who came to Lexington as a skilled laborer. After his neighbors answered the Lexington alarm on April 19, 1775, Pomp Blackman enlisted and served for at least one 3-year term. I invite you to learn more about the Black Patriots of Lexington and the other Black Patriots of the Revolutionary War. These men and women were heroes and founders of our great nation, the United States of America. Till next time, I'm Sean Osborne, and thank you to the curators and researchers who make this program possible.